The first time I met Elaine Pendry, she was standing in my driveway like she owned it. "Excuse me," she snapped, hands on hips, her frosted bob catching the afternoon sun like a warning signal. "You can't park that here. This is HOA managed property." I blinked. "Pretty sure this is my land." "Not according to the map the HOA uses," she said, pulling a laminated printout from her tote bag like it was sacred scripture. "This area falls under Weststone Neighborhood Association jurisdiction. You'll need to follow community guidelines." I took the paper. It was a blurry printout of a Google satellite image with a red marker line scrawled across it. No official seal. No documentation. Just a red line. I just closed on the 3-acre lot next to the Weststone subdivision land that had never been part of their HOA. It was a private parcel, zoned separately. I bought it for the space, peace, and the freedom to build my own shop and live how I wanted. Lane didn't like that. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said, folding the paper and handing it back. "Never signed a contract, and this land's not within your declared boundaries." Elaine's nose scrunched like I just insulted her casserole. "We'll see," she said, turning on her heel and marching back across the property line like she was storming a battlefield. Days later, I got a letter. Notice of non-compliance. It claimed I was in violation of Weststone HOA's architectural guidelines for installing a non-approved structure, my workshop, which was still under construction. The letter threatened daily fines of $200 until compliance was met. I read it 3 times. They were treating me like I was under their rule. I wasn't. That's when I decided to get serious. I pulled my deed, surveyed property records, and called up a lawyer I knew from back when I used to work construction litigation. I wasn't going to let some overzealous HOA president bully me off my land. Elaine didn't back off either. She doubled down, started walking the edge of my property with a clipboard, taking photos. She sent more letters. Claimed precedent gave the HOA authority over adjacent lots that affect community cohesion. Whatever that was supposed to mean, one morning, I caught her trying to plant little white property line flags. I stepped out of my garage and called out, "Elaine, unless you've got a court order, I suggest you stop trespassing." She spun around. "We've submitted a petition to annex your property. You'll be part of Weststone by the end of the month," I laughed. "You can't just annex private land because it makes your neighborhood look better," she sniffed. "We'll let the judge decide." Then she stormed off like she'd already won. Only problem for her, I'd already filed preemptively for a declaratory judgment. I wasn't waiting around for Weststone HOA to twist things behind closed doors. I had maps. I had zoning records. I had my lawyer. Most importantly, I had time and a serious grudge. Elaine Pendry had no idea who she was messing with. The morning of the preliminary hearing, I parked my truck a block from the courthouse and walked the rest of the way, tie in one hand, coffee in the other. My lawyer, Dan, met me at the steps. He was a quiet guy, mid-40s, always looked like he was 2 steps ahead in a chess game no one else knew was happening. "They filed a counterclaim late last night," Dan said as we passed through security. "They're arguing your property is, quote, functionally integrated into the Weststone community." I let out a dry laugh. "Is that a legal term now?" "Not in any book I've read." The courtroom wasn't packed, but Elaine had brought her entourage, a few board members, and a man in a poorly fitted suit she introduced as HOA counsel. He spent more time fixing his cuffs than reviewing notes. Judge Whitaker called us up. Silver hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for having zero patience for nonsense. I liked him already. Elaine stood to give her opening remarks, her voice syrupy sweet like she was auditioning for local office. "Your Honor, we believe the defendant's property, while technically outside the original plat, has become an essential part of our community's visual and environmental consistency. His ongoing construction disrupts the aesthetic harmony we've worked hard to preserve." Judge Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "And what legal grounds are you citing to claim jurisdiction over a property not deeded to your association?" Elaine's attorney cleared his throat. "We're invoking equitable servitude, Your Honor. There's precedent for extending restrictions when the character of the surrounding development is significantly impacted." Dan leaned forward. "May I respond?" "Go ahead." My client never agreed to any such conditions. He purchased this land independently. It has always been separately zoned and taxed. There's no recorded covenant, no binding agreement, and no legal authority granting the HOA governance over his property. Furthermore, we have evidence the HOA attempted to manipulate zoning maps to imply otherwise. That last part got the judge's attention. "Evidence?" Dan slid a packet across the bench. "A scanned version of a letter sent by the HOA to the county zoning office requesting a correction to parcel boundaries. The request was denied. My client also obtained internal emails through a public records request. One exchange states, and I quote, 'If we can get the county to adjust the boundary lines, we can fine him into compliance.'" The courtroom went silent. Elaine's lawyer paled. That email was taken out of context. Judge Whitaker tilted his head slightly. "Would you like to explain the context in which that's an acceptable strategy?" Elaine didn't speak. She just looked straight ahead, lips pressed so tight they'd gone white. Dan continued, "We're not just asking for a dismissal. We're requesting an injunction preventing Weststone HOA from further interference, along with damages for legal fees and a formal censure of their actions." Whitaker nodded slowly, flipping through the packet. "I'll review this closely. For now, the HOA is ordered to cease all communication with the defendant regarding his property. No visits, no letters, no enforcement attempts. Is that clear?" Elaine didn't respond. He raised his voice slightly. "Mrs. Pendry," she nodded once, jaw clenched. Outside the courthouse, Dan lit a cigarette and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "You know they're not going to stop. I'm counting on it." Over the next week, I installed 2 new security cameras, one at the front gate, another overlooking the back acre. I wasn't interested in confrontation, but I wasn't going to be caught off guard either. Then came the backhoe incident. One evening, I came home to find a trench dug across the edge of my lot roughly 10 feet from the fence line. No warning, no notice. Just a gash in the earth with pink plastic flags fluttering like it was some kind of sanctioned project. I called the county public works department. They hadn't authorized anything. Next, I pulled the footage. Around noon, a crew wearing vests marked Weststone Maintenance had rolled in, walked the perimeter, and started digging. One of them even glanced right at the camera before giving a thumbs up. I sent the video to Dan. Within an hour, he drafted a motion for contempt. But I wasn't waiting for the next court date. The next morning, I drove down to the sheriff's department. I asked to speak with Detective Albright, someone I'd worked with years ago during a contractor fraud case. He remembered me, and I showed him the footage. "They did this without a permit," I said, "on private land. After a judge told them to stay away." He leaned back in his chair. "That's not just contempt, that's criminal trespass and property damage." By afternoon, deputies visited Weststone's offices. I didn't see it happen, but I heard from a neighbor that Elaine refused to come out of the building for over an hour. Eventually, a squad car rolled up and escorted her away. The HOA board went into full panic mode. They sent out an emergency newsletter claiming Elaine was taking a leave of absence to focus on personal matters. Her name disappeared from their website by the next morning, but the damage was done in more ways than one. Turns out, the HOA had been funneling funds into a discretionary account Elaine controlled. The digging paid out of that same slush fund. When the county started auditing, they found tens of thousands missing, supposedly spent on beautification projects that never existed. A few of the board members lawyered up immediately. One resigned and offered to testify. Meanwhile, I got a call from Dan. They're offering to settle. They'll pay your fees, sign a formal agreement acknowledging your independence from the HOA, and issue a public apology. I thought about it for a second. No deal. I want this in court, he paused. You sure? They tried to rewrite property lines, defrauded their own members. And they damaged my land. I want it on record. The court date was set. I spent the days leading up to it reviewing every email, every document, every photo. Dan prepped witnesses. We even got a zoning officer to agree to testify. When the day came, the courtroom was fuller than before. Word had spread. A few Weststone residents sat in the back whispering among themselves. Some looked angry, others just looked tired. Elaine wasn't there. Her attorney claimed she was recovering from stress-related illness. More likely, she didn't want to face the fallout. Dan laid it all out: unauthorized construction, document tampering, financial mismanagement. The judge listened, stone-faced, taking notes. When the HOA's lawyer tried to minimize the damage, Dan pulled out a final piece, a recorded call between a contractor and a board member where the contractor clearly asked, "This isn't private land, right?" And the board member replied, "It will be soon enough." That sealed it. Judge Whitaker ruled in our favor on every count. The HOA was fined, barred from any future annexation attempts, and ordered to reimburse me for all damages plus additional compensation for the trench excavation. But the best part: he mandated that Weststone HOA hold a public meeting to read the court's findings aloud to its members. Every detail. No omissions. Dan and I sat in the front row. When the new acting president read the part about Elaine's fraudulent annexation attempt, a man in the back muttered, "I knew she was crooked." Another replied, "She tried the same thing with the Sandersons last year." The meeting ended with scattered applause, not for the board, but for the fact that someone had finally stood up to them and won. Afterward, a few residents stopped me in the parking lot. "You ever think about running for the board?" one asked. I laughed. "I'd rather dig another trench, but thanks." My land stayed untouched after that. No letters, no flags, no more clipboard patrols, and Elaine. She was last seen selling her house in a rush, moving 2 counties over. I heard she tried joining another HOA, didn't last long. Some people never learned. 3 weeks after the ruling, a white envelope arrived in my mailbox, hand-delivered. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single page typed in bold font. "You may have won this round, but you've made enemies. Be careful where you build." There was no signature. I stood on my porch, envelope in one hand, the wind tugging at the corner. My eyes scanned the tree line across the road, but nothing moved. No cars I didn't recognize. No neighbors out walking dogs. I wasn't scared. But I was done playing defense. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office and filed a formal request for a property line reaffirmation survey, certified by a licensed surveyor. It wasn't cheap, but I wanted every inch of my land mapped, documented, and sealed by the county. No more arguments. No more blurred lines or shaky satellite images. While I waited the 2 weeks for the survey to be completed, I poured my energy into finishing the steel frame for the shop. I worked late, floodlights humming as I bolted the last beam into place. I caught glimpses of cars slowing as they passed, especially a black Audi with a vanity plate that read W-Show a 1. Subtle. One evening, just past 10, I heard footsteps on gravel behind my garage. I moved quietly, cut the lights, and stepped out the side door. A man in a brown vest stood near my generator, fiddling with something. "Hey," I called, flashlight beam locking onto his hands. "Don't move." He froze, eyes reflecting the light. I saw the WNA logo, the HOA's maintenance crew. He took off running before I could ask anything else. I chased him halfway to the edge of the property before he ducked into a waiting truck and peeled off. I couldn't see the plates, but I'd gotten a good look at his face. The next morning, I filed a police report for attempted vandalism and trespassing. The officer who came out was young, probably new, but he took down everything and promised to follow up. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Albright. "You might want to come down here," he said. "We picked up your trespasser. He confessed, said he was paid to disable your generator system." I drove straight to the station. Albright slid a folder across his desk. "Name's Ray Thompson. works part-time for a landscaping company that contracts with Weststone. They told him to take care of the noise issue from your property, paid him under the table. That's not just vandalism, I said. That's a hit job on my infrastructure. You're not wrong. He flipped open the file, revealing a signed statement. Here's the twist. He gave us the name of the board member who paid him Marcus Leland. I stared at the name. Leland had never said a word during the court hearings. He always sat to Elaine's right, scribbling notes but never speaking. Albright continued. We're building a case. But we need something more solid before we move. If you happen to get any more threats or if they contact you again, let us know immediately. That night, I reviewed my camera footage from the past month. Nothing new, but I set up a motion alert system tied to my phone. If anyone stepped foot on my land again, I'd know in seconds. A few days later, the survey team showed up. 3 men in orange vests spent the better part of the day measuring every corner, driving stakes, marking boundaries with fluorescent paint. When they left, one of them handed me a binder with every detail coordinates, elevation, historical overlay, and a notarized statement from the county engineer. This map, he said, is bulletproof. Anyone tries to say otherwise, send them to us. I made 5 copies. 2 nights later, I woke at 3:40 in the morning to the sound of tires crunching gravel. I slid out of bed, grabbed my phone, and checked the motion alerts. The east camera showed a truck idling just beyond the property edge. Headlights off. No markings. I didn't go outside. I called Albright. By the time the cruiser arrived, the truck was gone, but it had left behind fresh tracks and something even better. A plastic bag sat under one of the trees near the fence. Inside, a tablet still powered on with a single open document. It was a draft proposal, an internal HOA memo outlining a plan to reclassify neighboring land parcels through a backdoor petition to the zoning board. The language was vague, but my property was listed by name. The file had metadata. It had been created on a tablet registered to Marcus Leland. Albright took the evidence and promised to expedite the investigation. A week later, the county prosecutor filed charges against Leland and 2 other board members for conspiracy to commit property fraud, unlawful surveillance, and attempted sabotage. Elaine's name didn't appear on the list yet, but rumors swirled that she'd been the one coordinating from the shadows while the others carried out the work. When the charges hit the local newspaper, the Weststone community exploded. I started getting calls, not threats, apologies. Residents who had once backed the board now wanted to know how they could distance themselves. Some admitted they'd been pressured into silence, threatened with fines or violations if they spoke against Elaine or Marcus. At the next Weststone HOA meeting, over half the seats were empty. The remaining members faced a barrage of questions from residents demanding financial transparency, a full forensic audit, and a vote to dissolve the current board. I didn't attend the meeting, but someone slipped a copy of the minutes into my mailbox. Every motion passed unanimously except one. A proposal to extend the HOA's jurisdictional authority beyond its original boundary lines was struck down before it even made it to a vote. A few days later, Dan called me. Thought you'd want to know Weststone just filed paperwork to restructure as a voluntary civic association. They're dropping mandatory dues, enforcement powers, all of it. Counties forcing them to recharter if they want to keep operating. I stared at the hills beyond my property, the frame of my workshop now fully enclosed and waiting for its final inspection. What happens to the board members? I asked. 2 already resigned. The rest are under review. Leland's facing felony charges. The others might get lesser pleas depending on what they admit to. And Elaine, she's being investigated for misuse of funds. The audit turned up an improvement grant she issued to herself 3 years ago. No receipts, no approvals. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in months, quiet, not silence, just peace. The kind that comes when the last stone's been turned, the last lie exposed. A few days later, I got a knock at the door. It was an older couple from down the road, Linda and Carl. They introduced themselves, said they'd lived in Weststone for 15 years and had voted for Elaine twice before finally realizing what she was. "We wanted to say thank you," Linda said, "for standing up when the rest of us were too scared." Carl looked around at the workshop, the cleared land, the new fence line. "This is what independence looks like," he said. "Glad somebody still knows how to fight for it." I offered them coffee and we sat outside as the sun dipped behind the ridge. No clipboards, no letters, no threats, just neighbors again. 2 months passed. The leaves began to change and with them, so did the neighborhood. Weststone's entrances, once decorated with pristine flower beds and banners announcing community events, now stood bare. The signs were still there but weathered and cracked. No one had replaced them. No one was organizing anymore. I kept to myself, finishing the inside of my shop. The tools were mounted, the wiring passed inspection, and the concrete floor bore the first few oil stains from the Chevy project I'd been waiting years to start. Life had settled into something normal again until the fire. It happened just after midnight. I was asleep when the motion alerts went off. I checked the feed expecting maybe a deer or a possum. Instead, I saw orange flickering behind the shop. I was out of bed and sprinting barefoot across the gravel before I could even think to grab a hose. Flames licked up the side of a storage shed I'd built to house lumber and spare parts. The fire hadn't reached the main structure yet, but it was close. I grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted just inside the shop and sprayed until the pressure bled out, keeping the blaze from spreading. By the time the fire department arrived, the shed was half ash. They said it looked like accelerant had been used. The next morning, I gave my statement to a fire marshal. He walked the perimeter with me, then crouched near the blackened remains of a gas can. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "No lightning, no faulty wiring. Someone set this." He took samples. I handed over the full security footage. The camera facing the back fence had caught the tail end of a figure slipping through the trees, wearing a hoodie and gloves. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but you could see the limp in his left leg. I knew that limp, Ray Thompson. Apparently, his plea deal hadn't come with a full change of heart. Detective Albright called me later that week. "Ray's missing," he said. "He skipped his last check-in with pretrial services. We've got a bench warrant out." "You think he's the one who did it?" I asked. "We're almost certain, but we're also looking at who might have sent him." "I don't think he's acting alone." I walked to the edge of my property that afternoon, past the charred remains of the shed. The wind had shifted, carrying with it a smell of burnt plastic and scorched earth. Something about the ash made everything quieter, not peaceful, just heavy. I didn't rebuild the shed. I left the scar there. The next piece fell into place when Albright called again a week later. We searched Marcus Lelland's financials. Turns out he made a large cash withdrawal the day before the fire. Just under the reporting threshold, but flagged because of the timing. We also found a burner phone in his desk drawer. He paused. "There's a single outgoing call the night of the fire. Ray's number." This time the charges weren't civil, they were criminal. Marcus was arrested for conspiracy to commit arson, among other things. His bail was denied. But it wasn't over. The fire had drawn attention from higher up. The district attorney's office opened an expanded investigation into Weststone's board. Financial fraud was one thing, coordinated sabotage. That got people interested. 3 subpoenas went out the next day. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Andrea Macklin, brought me in for a deposition. She had a reputation for being meticulous. Her office was filled with stacks of labeled folders and a whiteboard covered in timelines and names. She didn't waste time. "We believe Elaine Pendry continued to direct operations after stepping down. We're connecting dots, but we need someone who's seen the full picture." "That's you." I laid it all out: every encounter, every letter, the trench, the threats, the trench digger's arrest, the attempted generator sabotage, the memo draft, the fire. She listened without interrupting, taking notes with a pencil worn down to the metal. When I finished, she said, "We're pursuing a RICO case. The HOA operated more like a criminal enterprise than a neighborhood association. I'd never heard the words RICO and HOA used in the same sentence before, but it fit. The prosecutor's office moved fast. Within 10 days, federal agents served warrants at 3 homes in Weststone. Elaine's condo was among them. They found binders full of internal documents, handwritten notes, and a burner phone identical to Marcus's. Some of the notes referenced property consolidation strategy and targeted pressure initiatives. One entry even mentioned me by name next to the phrase cut power, isolate, dissuade. Elaine went quiet. Her attorney issued a statement claiming she was not involved in any unlawful activity, but no one believed it. Too much had piled up. Residents of Weststone were furious. They held a special vote to dissolve the board entirely. A new interim committee was formed, made up of longtime residents who hadn't been involved in any of the schemes. They opened the books, held listening sessions, and invited the county in to audit everything. One of them, a retired teacher named Bethany Rhodes, came to my house one afternoon. "You probably don't want to hear from us," she said, standing on my porch with a clipboard and a thermos, "but I wanted to say something anyway." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "We were blind," she said. "We let people like Elaine run the place because they sounded confident. They used rules like weapons. We didn't speak up. That's on us." I didn't say anything. She handed me a form. "We're not an HOA anymore. We're a civic association now. No enforcement powers, voluntary dues. Just neighbors trying to rebuild trust." The form was a waiver, officially recognizing the independence of my parcel and affirming that no future body tied to Weststone would attempt annexation, enforcement, or jurisdiction over it. I signed it. As she was leaving, she turned back and said, "The new committee wants to plant trees along the old boundary line, something to mark the change. Would you be okay with that?" "Long as they stay on your side," I said. She smiled, not the fake kind, just tired, maybe a little hopeful. In December, the trial began. Elaine, Marcus, and 2 others were charged with conspiracy, fraud, and attempted arson. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury took less than a week to return guilty verdicts on all counts. Elaine cried when the sentence was read. 2 years in prison. Restitution. Community service once released. Marcus got 5. The others took plea deals. The court ordered the dissolution of the former Weststone HOA entity. It no longer existed as a legal body. I watched from the back row, never testified, never spoke to the press. I didn't need the spotlight. I just wanted it done. The workshop's lights glowed warm that winter, even as snow settled over the hills. I finished the interior insulation, built a workbench the size of a small boat, and restored the old Chevy's engine until it purred like it was brand new. Some nights I sat on the porch watching the tree line where the old fence used to be. The new saplings stood there, barely taller than fence posts, planted by volunteers from the Reformed Civic Group. They'd asked again, and this time I said yes. The burned shed spot remained untouched. A reminder. One afternoon in early spring, a boy rode past my property on a dirt bike, slowed, and waved. His parents had moved into one of the houses formerly owned by a board member. They'd gutted it, painted the siding, and hung wind chimes from the porch. I waved back. The land was mine. The fight was over, and for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood